I'm joined today with a buddy, an entrepreneur I've been lucky enough to get to work with. We're overlooking the beautiful San Francisco Bay, and it's awesome to have you here. I'm with Mr. Andrew Myers. What's going on, man?
Thanks, Bax. It's nice to be back in San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's been a while. I didn't thought maybe the vibe was gone, but still just really strong tech and interesting people here, and it's awesome to be back.
Yeah, we're glad that Andrew's helping to make San Francisco great again. That's what we're here. So Andrew, we obviously have a lot we can talk about around all kinds of stuff, Bitcoin, AI, whatever, and I'm sure we'll touch on all that. But I wanted to start with the story of how we met, which is, we were talking about, you saw my LinkedIn profile, some crazy guy that's into Bitcoin, that's into solar, and I'll never forget when we chatted for the first time. I was like, oh my God, I'm certainly meeting somewhat of an energy Bitcoin solar soulmate. To the best of my knowledge, you're still one of the only people I know who's also somewhat of a Bitcoin and solar maximalist. Why are we such a rare breed? Why is this such a strange thing to be all the way in on Bitcoin, all the way in on solar?
It's more than just Bitcoin, it's more than just solar. And one of the things that attracted me to talking to you was that you were talking about, quote unquote, building the hive mind.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Using Bitcoin and solar. And when you talk about the hive mind, and a lot of people have different takes on what that could mean, but for me, it's like this general concept of collective human enlightenment, or at least like bringing more people up to a level of wisdom and understanding and kind of general cooperation as human beings. That would just be a much better way to live than how we're currently getting along. And so seeing somebody who can kind of connect those dots, think about, okay, what is a collective AI intelligence powered by solar and other abundant forms of energy, and then kind of all settling over Bitcoin as far as the value transactions happening. It seems to be where the future is going, so that's why I'm interested in it.
Yeah, and that was in 2020, early COVID days when we first met. So a lot has happened since then. A lot's happened, obviously, for you and your company, Satoshi Energy, which I'm obviously stoked to be an investor in. Maybe before we jump into that, maybe let's start a little bit with solar. I mean, you obviously have been deep in the energy industry for a long time. I used to work in solar. When I first got into solar, we were looking at 15 cents a kilowatt hour or more. Now we're talking 3 cents a kilowatt hour or less. What all has happened in solar over the last 4 or 5 years? Where are we in terms of the levelized cost of energy, in terms of the learning rate, or the learning curve, where, every doubling of cumulative capacity, the levelized cost of energy is coming down a certain percentage. I've seen people quoted at 20%, 40%. What is your best guess on where we are? Is that slowing down? Is it continuing to accelerate?
I think the biggest trend in solar PV, which I talk about a lot when I talk to energy companies and even to some extent with Bitcoin data center companies, is that you had sort of the technology's been there for 30 plus years, and then they started manufacturing at scale and ultimately coming down the cost curve. But around the same time, there were a lot of solar design and manufacturing companies that were trying to make more efficient solar panels. And to some extent that's good. But what the industry kind of realized was that actually a 15 to 20% solar panel is efficient enough. And there's plenty of land area available to deploy all of that and scale up solar production. So they all started producing solar panels in that efficiency range at high volume and at low cost. Whereas if you want to get a more efficient solar panel, then the R&D costs are going to go up, manufacturing costs are going to go up, et cetera. So we've had the same thing happen in the Bitcoin industry where, everybody's saying, well, is there going to be a more efficient Bitcoin ASIC that's going to make the last generation obsolete? Or should I get the new generation, or should I get the old generation? And I think basically it's leveled out where, SHA-256 ASICs are basically at a level of efficiency that investors are comfortable with, and they're just now manufacturing them at scale, high volume, low cost. And so it's less about the name of the game in Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin data centers now is less so about having the more efficient ASIC, and it's more about just having access to power capacity.
Right. And so specifically with solar, what is your best guess? Like, are we at 3 cents kilowatt hour? What's your best guess on the LCOE? And is it coming down 20% every doubling, 40%? What is your best guess on that learning?
I haven't looked at, like, Lazard does the really good LCOE report. I think last time I looked, like, unsubsidized solar is somewhere around 3 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour. But then it depends on kind of PPAs as well, like demand for power. So there's a lot of like big corporate buyers, for example, that have kind of come into the market and they're trying to get, solar PPAs. And that's actually kind of driven the price up. And other market dynamics, like in 2022, you had gas prices went way up and therefore energy prices went way up.
Inflation in general, I'm sure.
Inflation is part of it. It was also like a squeeze in the gas market due to what was going on in Ukraine and Russia.
Sure.
And so that actually just drove up energy prices in general, which then like people were able to get a higher premium even for a solar PPA.
Yeah.
But in general, yeah, it's like the cheapest form of energy production from a marginal cost perspective will continue to be that just because of the massive abundance, like orders of magnitude more solar power, hitting the earth every year than there is full resources of everything else.
Right.
So it's not.
Yeah, and I think this is, for those listening that maybe don't have this context, I mean, this is something I think both of us saw very early on. For me, I remember reading about this in like 2012 era time frame. It's like, look, every doubling of utility capacity, the levelized cost of solar is coming down by some constant, 20%, 40%, depending on whose data sets you're looking at. Lithium-ion batteries seem to be following a similar trend of also around 20%, something like that. And so to me, the holy grail has always been, for context, coal or nat gas, we're talking like 7 cents a kilowatt hour for that sort of stable baseload power. For me, the holy grail has been, when can we get solar plus storage to like 3 cents a kilowatt hour or less? Is that something you think is still going to happen this decade, further out? Are you bullish on that?
I'm not up to speed on the cost curve for battery storage. I want to say like a standalone battery storage system, the like cost of energy production is somewhere around $100 per megawatt hour today.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not that's getting significantly cheaper over time, I don't know. But even at the current cost point, I don't think you have to have solar and storage together, basically. So like you have a lot of solar going onto the grid. Take the Texas power market, for example. It had a lot of wind power, like 25% of the energy in the market comes from wind power.
Right.
They've built out something like 20 gigawatts of solar just in the last few years. So like nighttime is largely covered by wind.
Right.
Daytime is now largely covered by solar. And then you have batteries that are just kind of consuming power when it's available to charge up, whether that's at night from the wind or during the day from the solar. And then they're discharging at times when demand goes up and prices go up. And so they're making positive financial return just with that kind of core bit.
Yeah, and wind, for context, is also like 3 cents kilowatt hour-ish.
So in like 2019, 2020, wind and to some extent solar PPAs were like in ERCOT in like the high teens per megawatt hour.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 1.8. There were like wind PPAs at that time for close to like 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour.
Wow. Fucking
and solar PPAs that were probably in the
yeah. And to be clear, I mean, even though I say I'm a solar maximalist, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, wind obviously has gotten cheap enough to play a big role here too, although it's perhaps a slightly less steep cost curve. One of the big challenges that I see is, you look at a market like ERCOT, where you're, I would say, certainly one of the biggest experts I know. You see just like gigawatts and gigawatts of solar storage and wind not getting built. A lot of that seems to do with the regulatory process and the permitting process. How much of that, like, if we wanted to, let's say humanity wanted to use, 5 orders of magnitude more electricity, which I think we'll get there for sure. I think humanity will always have more use for energy. How much is dependent on, just cutting red tape, making that permitting process easier? Is that something you see as possible? Or is that something you see like, no, we're going to have to go more off grid with storage to get around that?
It's basically working that way in ERCOT now with some exceptions. So there's kind of an approach, high-level approach that's taken in ERCOT which is called connect and manage, or meaning in most markets, you're trying to connect a new power generation asset or a new load, and they do very, kind of complex long-term thinking studies and interconnection studies. And then they always look at kind of the worst case scenario and say, well, like, what happens in this worst case scenario? And that kind of gives them reason to like not interconnect more of that load or more of that generation.
Yeah.
And part of that like worst case scenario is driven by the fact that in most markets, the demand side is not flexible at all because of regulations.
Got it.
You have like a utility that sets one price per power. And so regardless of what demand goes up, like the average consumer is getting one price per power. And so they don't have any incentive to actually shut off during peak demand. Whereas in ERCOT, this kind of connect and manage approach, you have more flexibility on the demand side, not as much as there should be, but more than the average market. And then even on the supply side, they're taking an approach where they still do, long-term planning studies and interconnection studies, but they have, real-time spot prices at each node. And so they effectively are letting generation and load connect, and then they manage it through a real-time spot market, meaning a price signal tells you where's the intersection of supply and demand, and that determines then if a generator's operating or if they're not operating, and whether a load is operating or not operating. So I think more of that, basically you need more flexibility on the demand side. That's to some extent doable in a market like ERCOT. In most other markets, it's not really doable, largely due to monopoly utilities setting prices. So you'd have to kind of do away with that in order to get like true flexibility and true scaling of energy production and energy consumption without massively overbuilding on transmission and peaker plants.
So that would be my next question. Massively overbuilding on transmission. I've seen some people argue we need basically high voltage DC lines across all of the United States, connect all the different, grids together. Do you see that? Is that something that's realistic? Is it possible? Or do you think we're going to need to plan without that as a possibility? So more potentially a storage off grid.
I'm not a big proponent of off-grid unless it's for like extreme resiliency. I think markets exist for a reason. They give you ultimately lower cost and kind of optionality in terms of what you do with the power that you produce. So if you build a power plant off-grid to sell to one customer and you have basically one use case for it, and that use case goes away,
right,
or it's not economical at the price point that you're producing power, then what do you do with the rest of that energy or any of that energy? The markets obviously exist for that. Like we help data centers co-locate with a wind farm or a solar farm or other type of power generation, and they consume that power when it's at its lowest value and monetize that. And when they're not consuming power, they shut off because, say, the revenue per megawatt hour of Bitcoin mining at the time is less than the power price at that time. Well, that power generator can just sell that power into the market. So they've got that great optionality.
But sorry, I guess the question I want to get super clear on is, I think there's no sort of upper limit on what humanity can do with electricity. Like, I think if you gave me more and more electricity, we can use more. I guess my question is, it seems to me like one of the big bottlenecks is regulatory-wise being able to, or maybe it's financing, maybe it's land permitting, being able to lay more transmission, and whether or not that's like a potential solution or we have to find ways around that.
I think the biggest challenge with building new transmission is regulatory complexity.
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with the cost of doing this and like whether it's every project's going to be different, right? Like you're building a transmission line from one, power production center to one load center. Like you have to run those numbers and figure out if you think it can make money. Mm-hmm. But I mean, most certainly, like it can be done from a physics perspective, from an engineering perspective. There are projects that absolutely do pencil out, like shipping power from West Texas to California or up to Denver or over to the eastern parts of Texas, or even as far as high voltage DC from Texas all the way to New York, where you even have some like a bit of like a nice time delta there, where you have a bunch of sun that's happening at solar power that's hitting at 2 p.m. In Texas, but let's say maybe 5 p.m. in Texas, but then you're at 6 p.m. in New York City when prices are spiking. Or you go even further and you like think, okay, it's noon in the Sahara and it's 6 p.m. in Beijing.
Exactly. World grid.
Yeah, it's all there, and I think the cost ultimately would make sense. And a lot of people say, oh, well, that's expensive, and that's not going to happen because it's so expensive. But we also live in this mindset of like, we're 100 years into paper US dollars that are just inflating away the value of everything and making it harder to invest in anything that actually matters, when like all of that fiat money is just going into like more war and commercial real estate.
Ooh.
When instead, if you had sound money a la Bitcoin, then you could actually invest in.
Interesting. So you think that, one of the secondary consequences of having sound money Bitcoin is that perhaps it'll end up solving, some of the like financing and regulatory issues that we have today, and it'll be a lot easier not only to pencil out, but, for, I guess, I don't know, groups of people, whether that's governments or private investors, to actually lay the track, so to speak, lay the transmission line.
I think that money talks, and it's the people with money that it's their ethos that is reflected politically and socioeconomically.
Sure.
So I think ultimately people with Bitcoin, you ideally have a more kind of free market ethos, will ultimately either through technological innovation make the current political, government, regulatory cabal obsolete, or they will elect leaders who then kind of dismantle it from the inside.
Yeah.
And then from a sound money perspective, I just think that there are things that we think are expensive today only because money and wealth has been so concentrated into the hands of like very few private banks effectively and governments, to where everybody is going to be more wealthy, and things that seem expensive today are actually going to be a small part of our overall budget in the future.
Yeah. So moving into Bitcoin money a little bit, which is your obviously bread and butter, which you're an expert in. I'll never forget, I guess in 2020, I heard you, and then I think you released a report coining the phrase energy-backed money. And I think this is the absolute best way to describe Bitcoin basically ever. In fact, I know you and I are also mutual fans of Buckminster Fuller and many other people, Ford, Edison, who saw energy-backed currency sort of evolving over, the last century or so. What, if anything, would you change about your definition? Or what does Bitcoin being energy-backed money mean to you today? Like, how would you explain that to someone who's not deep in the industry?
I think money just has certain qualities that make it, good money or bad money. It's like money has kind of is this three-legged stool: store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. But what are kind of the attributes that make that possible? And so there are things like, is it relatively scarce or distributed or fungible or durable and all of that? So there are different types of money, like fiat money, for example, is not scarce because anybody can just print more of it.
Right.
It has, controlled that money printer, which is what governments have done throughout history. Paper money in particular also is not very durable. But you could sort of say the same about digital money. And then you look at like gold as an example, right? It's very, very fungible. It's not so divisible. It's harder to kind of divide that up and use that as money for small transactions, for example. But it also has kind of this physical nature where it's sort of like easy to lose or steal, hard to transact digitally,
Right.
all these kind of challenges with that. So I think gold is like generally, and I'm no like monetary expert, but I think gold is generally considered a commodity money, meaning like it's a physical commodity and it is used as money. I think there's maybe another concept called representative money, where it's kind of like, okay, maybe you represent a commodity with some other kind of way to measure it and transact in it. I think maybe dollars to some extent could be that, where it's like you had gold-backed dollars for a period of time. That was effectively, commodity money or representative money. And then when you look at Bitcoin, people want to say it's not backed by anything. Even people within Bitcoin want to say it's not backed by anything. But when I say it's backed by energy, what I'm saying is like those attributes that make it valuable. So like the scarcity, and that's the 21 million Bitcoin supply limit.
Right.
And just the open protocol and the way that the protocol works, all of those rules are secured by energy.
Yeah.
So they're secured by computation, of which is energy going into that computation to actually make it happen. So if you wanted to change those rules, you wanted to manipulate, change, improve, make worse the attributes of this type of money, it would require a lot of energy to do so. And so much so that it's, basically impossible to do at this point.
So one way I've thought about this over time is that there's only one currency of the known universe. And this gets into some of the hive mind stuff as well. And at some level, it's just calories or joules or kilowatt hours. And everything is like modeled on that in some way, shape, or form, from like the tiny cellular level up to like whatever, the galaxies. I've seen some people, I don't know if you know this guy, Capriel, or Charles Capriel. He's got a fund. Anyways, he's basically created a whole bunch of different metrics for trading Bitcoin. Like one of the best ones is literally just trade on like the cost of joules. Just like look at the energy input cost and trade on that. And something I've been thinking about, I'm still not sure like what the perfect model is. Do you think we're going to get to a point where, eventually within like a percentage point or two, we'll be able to price Bitcoin purely based on energy cost? And that's it?
I've kind of seen this proposed. I honestly haven't thought deeply about it at all. However, my kind of gut feeling off the cuff statement on this would be, I don't think you can value Bitcoin just on the energy that's put into it, because it's not just all about Bitcoin mining. It's about what are the use cases and applications of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Part of this is maybe one way to think about it. I don't know. It's the first time I've really thought too deeply about this. Money can represent all economic transactions.
Mm-hmm.
All value spread and transferred across society can be represented by one money, like Bitcoin. But you would not need to represent every economic transaction purely in energy, I don't think, or at least not in the energy that goes into Bitcoin. So like the question is like, how much of society's energy do you need to secure the Bitcoin network?
Yeah.
And the answer is not 100% of the world's energy, because if you were doing that, you would not be using energy for anything else, and you would all perish.
Right. The answer is also not zero.
And the answer is also not zero, because then it'd be easy to change the rules, and we don't want that. Yeah, I mean, and ultimately, energy does underlie every transaction, everything we do in society. It's just a question of like, are you going to kind of meter that, or are you just going to measure it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I think we're going to measure in Bitcoin. I do wonder, though, eventually if like there will be kind of like a joule equivalency for Bitcoin. And I don't know, but I do think you were getting at something really interesting there, which is, I don't remember where, maybe you shared this to me years ago. Maybe I found it somewhere. I haven't been able to find it again since, but there was some article I read or some study where, it was like a bunch of basically gold bugs. And they were trying to basically figure out, okay, in, gold mining terms, what's like the quote unquote percentage of the world energy supply, gold being a proxy for energy as well, obviously needing energy to dig it up, that's necessary to secure the monetary supply. And I think I'd read something like, 2%. I don't remember the specific number, but let's say it's 2%. It's interesting because this is an empirical question that like we should be able to answer, in the next decade or so as Bitcoin goes mainstream. Like there is an empirical number with maybe some, 10, 20% fluctuations, but there is a percentage of the world energy supply necessary to secure it. And we're going to figure out exactly what the market clearing price for that is.
Yeah, I think even the energy to secure Bitcoin will be an open market. Probably some of it also depends on how much zero cost energy there is.
Yeah.
So we're moving towards this largely solar plus wind future, where if the sun is shining or the wind is blowing at a time when there's not enough demand for it, then that energy is wasted. Like those power plants have to curtail, they have to shut down and stop producing energy.
Right.
Unless there's a load there that can absorb that energy. And with Bitcoin data centers, they are that load that absorbs and monetizes that energy.
Yep.
So I guess theoretically, the amount of energy backing Bitcoin could also just go up as a consequence of all of that surplus energy that otherwise wouldn't have a use.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that next. So I am firmly of the belief, you mentioned Jevons paradox earlier, that like as things become cheaper, people use more and more of it. I'm firmly of the belief that, there's no such thing as too much energy. And it's funny because I've always been, quote unquote, an environmentalist, which I know you have as well, but also very anti this camp of like, conserve, curtail. It's like, no, like more should be clean. Energy abundance, exactly. Like we should be aiming for a world of abundance. This whole like kind of mindset of there's not enough, there's scarcity, like that, it's just bullshit. And, what's interesting is whenever solar or some energy source gets to a new cost point, you open up new markets. Like, the company that I was at, Bright, I remember, the whole thesis of going into Mexico is like, okay, solar had just crossed the tipping point in 2014 where it was cheaper than Mexican grid electricity. Boom, new market gets open. And if you look at it, as solar keeps falling, 3 cents, 2 cents, 1 cent, whatever, a kilowatt hour, you start opening up markets for desalination of water, creating synthetic biofuels and green hydrogen, all kinds of compute, obviously Bitcoin being one, AI being the topic du jour. How do you see, I don't know, over the next decade or a couple of decades, as demand for energy increases, all kinds of new markets get open? How do you see this mix forming? Like, you're already seeing this today. You started off as a pure Bitcoin mining company. I'm assuming you're doing a decent amount of AI work now. How much do you think of this electricity demand is going to move to the AI load? How is that going to like balance with Bitcoin? How's it going to balance with other, desal, green hydrogen use cases as well? Yeah. What does the next 10 to 50 years look like for us?
I think it's all dependent on market forces, right? It's what do the people want? What are the people demanding?
Yeah.
And right now there is a lot of demand from the people to have Bitcoin. And so the value of Bitcoin is going up, and that's, incentivizing more energy consumption from Bitcoin mining. Now with AI, I don't know if it's something that, and same with Bitcoin, I don't know if most people actually want sound money. They need it. Like they're wanting it and going to, like, more and more people are going to be demanding it. I think it's kind of similar with AI right now. I think a lot of people weren't aware of how useful it can be until you had this sort of, LLM moment a couple of years ago. But maybe as those applications become more ubiquitous and well understood, then demand for AI also goes up. For demand for compute for AI also goes up, and thus the energy demand there. I think things like water are interesting. There's a good amount of fresh water in a lot of places, and they're doing fine, with agriculture or drinking water or whatever it may be using that water. But there are other places with drought and where desalination makes sense. And so if you have really low cost energy production, then desalination can be really cheap. And then it's a question of like, how do you get the water to where it needs to be to then, put water in the desert and grow land there? And then maybe we get to, and part of this too is like maybe there's significant population growth. It's kind of trending the other direction right now, unfortunately. But I would like to see, increased population growth, at which point I think we still have an abundance of resources globally, including energy, water, that may or may not need to be desalinated. And so that more people would create more demand.
Yeah.
And then supply would have to catch up with that. I don't know if I'm kind of.
No, it's good. Well, it's a good framework for this. I mean, maybe let's talk about just the specifics of Bitcoin mining versus AI compute. I've seen some companies that were almost entirely Bitcoin mining, and now they're projecting 2 years out, they're going to be almost entirely AI compute. How are you seeing just like the cost in these two markets today? Specifically, I mean, I don't know the numbers on this, maybe you have them, but you see, Amazon, I don't know if they bought the PPA with the nuclear power plant, but it seems like they were paying way above market for that. What is the clearing price right now to get the more AI?
I think in 5 years, in terms of us selling or like developing sites and brokering power, and from a software perspective, kind of settling power contracts, it's probably close to a 50-50 split. But right now, like the target energy price for a Bitcoin data center is they need their all-in power cost less than, let's say, $40 a megawatt hour, and with like a 95% uptime. Now, an AI data center right now, they're much more aggressively looking for power, or equally aggressively looking for power capacity, but willing to pay a much higher price. So they, and I don't know exact prices because they don't really state it, and it's hard to know exactly like what, like with Bitcoin, you know exactly what you're getting out when you put it in. There's a USD BTC exchange rate, there's a network hash rate, you know what that revenue per megawatt hour is going to be based on the energy that you input into it. Now, an AI data center, it's a question of like, what is the value of running that training or running the inference and actually then selling that to a customer who's then going to pay you some dollar amount or some Bitcoin amount for that computation. But I think and there's some Bitcoin data center companies that have like started dabbling in the AI space. Maybe to some extent they're just chasing investment or like playing on a trend. But they basically said they're willing to pay. I've heard some say they're willing to pay any price for energy, but obviously there's a limit to that. But really they're willing to pay kind of above what a Bitcoin data center would pay for energy. That said, they have different constraints. So they require much higher uptime, which is really a different type of power contract. I've heard that 99.9, maybe even higher, for most AI data centers. And of course, if you have like a traditional data center or hyperscale data center, they're also in that like 99.999% uptime. Whereas a Bitcoin data center, they can operate 50% of the time in some cases and actually make money doing that. And really what their target is maybe like 90 to 95% uptime, less than say $35 a megawatt hour. So there's kind of that constraint on how you structure the power contracts and the impact it has on the grid. There's constraints around labor, meaning like I think an AI data center typically needs more people and a more skilled workforce than you would need for like what is a very dumb form of compute in a Bitcoin data center. So typically then you might need to be closer to a city center or some like a hub where you actually can hire that sort of talent. And then the other related concept is connectivity. So like you might need a more robust fiber line for your AI data center versus your 1 megabyte every 10-minute plus some Bitcoin data center, which like has much less like bandwidth requirements. Water may also impact both, but I think it's
cooling.
For cooling, yeah.
So like if you had to guess, like let's just do some back of the envelope math. I saw anyone listening to this should check out SatoshiMG.com. Andrews and his team have put out some really nice, I guess, reports around energy, Bitcoin, all this stuff. You had some interesting estimates a couple of reports ago around total energy production in the world. What were we at there? It was like 125,000 to what was your...
I know global power capacity is somewhere in the range of like 7 to 8 terawatts. So I don't know how many terawatt hours that's. Well, terawatt hours per year would be that times 8,760. Yeah.
I think it was so let's just say Bitcoin, I think was the estimate there that I saw was for the Cambridge Bitcoin energy, whatever chart. I don't know how accurate that still is, but I think they were estimating something like 125-ish terawatt hours, maybe a little bit less. Maybe it was more than 125,000 because I remember the estimate they had, let's say it's 105 terawatt hours, was less than 1% of total energy consumption. It was between like 0.3 and 1%, depending on the estimate.
Yeah,
Is that fair?
I always kind of overlook the energy numbers and just look at power numbers. So when I was saying there's let's say about 7 terawatts of global power production, that's about 7,000 gigawatts of global power production. Bitcoin data centers globally are estimated to be consuming around 20 gigawatts of power capacity.
Okay.
Which means 20 out of 7,000, which is like less than 1/4%.
Holy shit. That's even smaller.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So less than 1/4%. A decade out. I know these things are impossible to speculate on, but if you had to, how much do you think total power production increases, power production and consumption? And what happens to Bitcoin? Like, does total consumption go up 10x and Bitcoin goes up 100x, 10x? What's your...
For all of humanity or just Bitcoin?
All of humanity and Bitcoin as a percentage.
I have no idea, but my goal is like, let's 100x it in the next decade.
Why so conservative, bro?
I know. Yeah, maybe another order of magnitude on top of there. I just think if the question is, what are we going to use it for? Yeah, and I think a lot of it's just going to be like completely rebuilding all of human society, whether it's, AI compute that's helping us rebuild and redesign the way the world can look and work and function. Electric vehicles, self-driving vehicles we were talking about earlier today. I think building entirely new buildings or like homes that we live in could be a huge thing. Desalinating water could be a huge thing. It's like maybe you take water out of the ocean, which there's a shit ton of that, and like turn a desert into a green space, like a Garden of Eden that's just like, geoengineered. All kinds of applications like that. Space travel. Maybe it's like producing rocket fuel using solar power. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think literally there is no. The more cheap electricity we have, the more cool shit we'll come up with. And like, honestly, at the end of the day, that's the source of wealth. Like more energy, more wealth gets people out of poverty. Full stop.
Right.
Full stop.
And there's plenty of energy, plenty of land, plenty of other minerals, resources, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Metals, like there's an abundance of all that to make it happen.
So one question I do have on that though is like there is an abundance, but there is some upper limit. So I told you yesterday I was chatting with one of my good friends who is also deep in the AI world and getting into the energy world. And he was asking me a question. He's a big AI bull. He's been involved, since the early days of OpenAI. And his big question to me was like, say you're way too conservative. And I tend to be pretty optimistic. So I'm like, okay. And he's like, we're just going to need way more energy than even you think. And particularly he's thinking for the AI trains. I'm like, okay. And he was like, let's play out your thesis with solar. I don't remember the exact numbers, but his basic idea was like, let's say, and I think someone else put this in a blog post I really like, let's say the AI machine, the paperclip maximization really does come to fruition. That's not paperclip maximization, it's solar panel maximization. And basically the gist was, imagine we cover like 1%, to 10%, to 50% of the Earth in solar panels. At what point do we hit a limit? And at what point is there a new solution? So, for example, you could obviously make the panels more efficient. You could have new, like the perovskites or new kinds of solar panels. But at some point, let's say things go as crazy as they do. Like we've already put all of Arizona, all of New Mexico, all of the California deserts just covered in solar panels.
I don't think it ever gets that far because, well, here's the thing. If there's a better use for that land than producing energy, it will be used for that use case. And maybe that better use is just having natural, untouched land out there. Humanity is ultimately going to decide that. But I think the best kind of rule of thumb estimate here right now, let's just take the United States as an example. You can power the entire United States, at least for 8 hours of the day, with basically one county in Texas worth of land. So if you want to 10x the United States energy consumption, take 10 counties out of Texas, nobody's going to notice. Most people outside of Texas don't even like Texas anyway.
This audience is a largely Texas audience.
I love Texas. I'm just saying, a lot of people shit on Texas all the time, but like Texas itself could power the entire United States times 10 for at least eight hours of the day. And the amount of wind capacity they have there too, you could probably do almost 24/7 power the entire United States.
So that's a great, very concrete example. But let's just say that demand is literally infinite. 1,000x's, the 10,000x's. It's just more than we keep out. At what point, and I don't know how much you thought about this, but can we basically move everything to space? So actually, solar panels, potentially.
Thought we would go there.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course we're going there, and then potentially even training our in space as well. Potentially doing our mining and manufacturing space. Is that something that you see on the horizon? Is that too sci-fi?
I think so. I mean, there's a concept of a Dyson sphere to capture kind of all of the energy from the sun. Now, if you surrounded the entire sun with a Dyson sphere, then you're blocking Earth from getting sun. So you could theoretically cover half of the sun.
Sounds bad.
Yeah, I wouldn't want that. You could theoretically cover half of the sun and then find a way to obviously transmit that energy to Earth, which you'd have to build some pretty crazy, and maybe or you just move the production closer to where the energy is being produced. Now there's also a question of like maybe you've just dimmed out someone else's star that we're not aware of, and it's sort of a tragedy of the commons situation at a universal scale.
Seems at least not unlikely.
Yeah,
it's possible.
You don't want to piss off the wrong aliens.
Exactly. Or interdimensional beings or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Well, I think I know that this is all definitely a little sci-fi, but I do think people are going to be shocked at how cheap it. That you guys are obviously in a pretty beautiful spot to capture some of that. Yeah.
Awesome. I mean, it's like, it's not science fiction. It's all theoretically possible. People just need to think a little bit bigger and take more chances. That's my opinion.
I agree.
That's really exciting to be a part of it.
Yeah, dude. Like, honestly, there's no better time to be alive right now. We're watching species transition.
Absolutely. Leveling up. 5D reality.
Again, why so conservative? So a couple of random thoughts that popped in my mind. Again, we're overlooking San Francisco Bay. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
First thought that came to I read you put a piece out a year or two ago where you talked a lot about one of our mutual heroes, Mr. Buckminster Fuller. Curious, A, why you're inspired by Buckminster Fuller. B, I think it was in Out of Control, one of his books. He talks a lot about, or maybe it was The Grunch of Giants. I don't remember which. But he talks about pirates. Do you read this part?
No.
Oh. Well, the gist of it is...
He's written a lot.
He's written a lot. He's probably like one of the most prolific writers, thinkers. The gist of the pirate thing is that there were the sort of magicians of the last couple of centuries were the seafarers, the pirates. The reason is they had the ability to sail by the stars, and they were no longer trapped in one, it's a micro-reality tunnel. They could be in one place, and have its own arbitrary culture, arbitrary laws. Most people that live there, it's like, this is the way the world works. This is what God or whatever gives us. The pirate or the seafarer could just say, okay, cool, this is one perspective, and then sail somewhere else. And there's a radically different set of laws and a radically different set of cultures. And basically they had this kind of God's idea. He argued that these people, to kind of control the world, let's say, by installing public governments, there's a lot of fun, somewhat conspiratorial thinking there. But then he argues that the pirates died out, like in either World War I or World War II, technology became too advanced for anyone to have all the pieces in that pie. And he argues there's no more pirates. Now, I personally hear that, and I think that seems like bullshit to me. It seems like the new pirates are on the web, and potentially in our industry. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd not heard his perspective on that, but it's interesting because it makes me think of like digital nomads today. Like you can travel the world and like get a taste of every culture and impact different cultures. And yeah, with the internet itself, you can influence people in different cultures or like educate them or give them value in some way and kind of shape culture and innovate globally, from one spot on the earth. It's really interesting. The pirates are basically like booty nomads. And
that's one way of saying it,
Oh, it's cool.
Yeah. What do you, you're someone I know that's lived in a lot of different places. I know you have one of the most plastic views of reality of entrepreneurs I know by far. Like do you feel in some ways like that? Do you feel the pirate ethos or?
I'm reading a book right now that like I've had recommended to me so many times, and Ryan Gentry finally like reminded me of it again to read it. It's Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Okay.
Yeah, is that his name? Yeah, I don't know the author, but really interesting book. And so the general premise is that like entities that he worked for, I think it was like government, like NSA type entities, and IMF, had him go around financing large infrastructure projects, largely like power generation and water infrastructure, things like that, on debt in a country that would be really hard for them to pay off. And then when they couldn't pay it off, then his bosses, like the U.S. government, could then go and like build a military base there or retain ownership or whatever it was. And I kind of think about it now and I'm like, we're almost doing this with Bitcoin, and that's kind of my interest in Bitcoin, but like with a more like less predatory approach to it. It's just saying like, hey, let's go to your country, your location, your power market, let's educate you on what an open, decentralized power market can look like. And does it make sense or not make sense to build more power generation here, build more Bitcoin mining? I'm not going to try to give you, a really predatory loan and like build a military base over here. But I am trying to like decentralize your power market and let more investment happen here. And I might try to sell you some SaaS around that. Like, but yeah, I think it's interesting. That's kind of my goal, is like travel the world and talk to every power market executive or regulator or whoever else that I can talk to and get them on board with Bitcoin and decentralized power markets.
What's been the most like interesting or sort of a lot of these markets, countries? How do I experience your dad doing all that?
I think we're just at the very beginnings of a lot of that. We've gone very deep in the ERCOT market. We have very good knowledge of the rest of the U.S. power markets, and I think largely global power markets work a lot the same. Some are more advanced than others, with ERCOT probably being the most advanced power market. But there's some cool stuff happening now where I think in countries that are really embracing capitalism again, like in El Salvador and Argentina most recently, they're considering sort of like completely revamping the power markets. So I'm starting to have some of those conversations where it's like, all right, fundamentally, like first principles thinking, how should you design a power market ground up? And how could that be potentially integrated with Bitcoin? And so it's conceptually, I think it's all there.
No, it's super badass. And I think a question I was trying to get out earlier, maybe a better way to phrase that is, a lot of the legacy infrastructure, like let's say in the United States, it's amazing, but like there's so much bureaucratic red tape that has to get cut. And eventually that'll happen. On the one hand, you've got Bucky, this guy to a grid, which should be awesome, but that seems pretty challenging. Maybe thinking it was sooner, should be awesome. But I guess what I was trying to get at when I said off-grid was not so much off-grid, but more microgrids, just basically going to like countries where it's just not fucking built yet. And because it's not built, you can actually just design everything from the ground up. Now, El Salvador maybe is kind of in a midway example. I'm sure they have a decent amount of infrastructure, but not in nearly as much as in the U.S. Argentina, I'm guessing, is pretty developed. It actually sounds like that could be a pretty cool use case where, you could actually redesign for a lot of fairly sophisticated infrastructure. Is that fair? Or what are you most bullish on? Reforming the old or just building brand new like Africa and Latin America microgrids for the ground up?
I think a little bit of both is going to be necessary. Absolutely, microgrids are going to be kind of an initial test bed of what a decentralized power market can look like. That said, in most places that like have an existing regulatory regime around energy production and consumption, like it's technically illegal for me to like have a solar panel on my roof and run a distribution line to my neighbor's house and sell him energy directly. It's illegal it's not immoral to do that. It's illegal. It's not unsafe to do that. It's just illegal because monopoly utilities control that territory. So I think some of that's going to change, but in the same way that, maybe you have like a strong, favorable kind of capitalist leaning political wind in a place like El Salvador or in Argentina, or ideally Texas or the United States starts to really open up and stay that way back to what it once was, what it was founded on, then I think you could have a lot of that innovation start with like the microgrid use case where maybe it's like a wealthy neighborhood and they just kind of realize that like, okay, maybe the grid's not as reliable as I want it to be. So I'm already building solar on my roof. My neighbor's got a generator in his basement and a gas tank in the back. And maybe we don't need this all the time, but in an emergency, maybe I'll want to do that. And so I want to set up a little like digital contract structure where when I need that energy, I can call on it and the payment will be automated. The energy flow will be automated. And it'll be this like level of redundancy in this micro market is what I call them. There's microgrids, but microgrids are currently lacking a micro market. So there's an opportunity to build that right now for sure.
And then some of you guys will probably move.
Not that Vitalik has a girlfriend now, so I heard Ethereum's going down.
What's some of that smart contract infrastructure?
Effectively, a power market does two things. They run an optimization model to match supply and demand to then set a price at each node in this network. and then they're a clearinghouse, a financial clearinghouse. So I largely think that Bitcoin solves the clearinghouse function. It's digital money, programmatic money. And then I think we need to create some sort of a decentralized protocol similar to Bitcoin where individual market participants can actually run the optimization algorithm and then coalesce on what prices are around the grid in a decentralized fashion rather than a current like top-down centralized fashion. Distributed computing. So like I could theoretically model the entire ERCOT power grid myself today. It's just that nobody's like accepting my price point as the source of truth. And to do that, I would actually have to have, data from all the power generators and all the loads to do that properly. Whereas ERCOT has that data because they get those bids and they get that data from all the energy producers.
So you're just saying it'll be basically a free market for bottle.
It'll be a decentralized protocol for setting prices, aka a decentralized market for power.
Interesting. And people can do you envision that actually being like, hey, I have solar house and I'm willing to sell it at this cost per kilowatt hour, and it's just like a giant.
Yeah, but it's going to be the person's AI is going to do it for them because like the average person doesn't give two shits about,
of course,
trading energy.
Exactly. But this is a business option. So
yeah,
we'll come and build this off.
Yeah, that's what I think. That's the path we're on.
Interesting. I know we talked a little bit about this at lunch and really starting it down the rabbit hole, but I personally am betting the farm right now that the data protocol that Bitcoin needs is Nostr. I know we're just in the very beginnings of that, but perhaps this will be interesting. I think we're probably many years away from the energy markets and getting there. But for you to
yeah, I'll have to look into it. Like I said, I've got zero experience with Nostr so far, other than meeting a few founders in the space and kind of seeing what's being chatted about.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say, I mean, on this podcast, we talk a lot about Nostr, but the beauty of it is it's extremely simple. Public-private key identity, Bitcoin keying, but doesn't have to be used that way. Free market of relays or servers that take the data and distribute it. And messages are 7 fields in JSON signed. And so with that, you can do so social media is first, but we're starting to see raw doors, IRL. You could basically sign those as bids and asks, so you can start to build any kind of market. So I think local Bitcoin is going to take off. The markets for eventually, what I'm really excited about is decentralized markets, not just for energy, but for compute, for storage, for bandwidth, for all kinds of digital resources. It's going to be a wild future.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, when I'm talking about with power markets, like they're going to need a protocol, right? And maybe whatever Nostr represents could be part of that protocol. I don't know. That part of it, we've yet to like really put pen to paper. Right now, it's largely conceptual and kind of an outline, and they have an understanding of kind of what are the key components and ideas about what are the right technologies to apply to make it happen. But I'm almost positive that it's possible now. It's just a matter of.
What do you think the first adopter will be? Will it be a microgrid that just?
To be honest, we're effectively doing this with our projects today. So we co-locate a data center with a power generation asset. They're separately owned, and in ERCOT at least, they're on what's called a private use network. So it's basically a 2-party microgrid, and that could be expanded to include more parties in there. And so we're already kind of like doing this like real-time accounting for prices and real-time accounting of like energy prices, energy consumption, all the terms of the power contract, and then able to settle that all in real time. And so I think there's just kind of levels on that where you could kind of maybe even price or if you had like 3 parties there, you could like determine a price on that little node in the network.
Yes. Yeah, we should definitely talk more about this. I mean, I think moving everything to Nostr is the direction I see it, and it's going to be a slow transition, but it'd be cool to see the first Nostr power.
It would be.
So we touched a bit on your pirate ethos in business, but you also have a really interesting pirate vagabond ethos, which I very much admire in your own personal life. You lived out of vans and camped in interesting places. You've traveled all over the world. I'm curious, like, what have you, I guess, I don't know, taken away from all those experiences, or any places or like alternative lifestyles you've tried out that you like the most?
It's a good question. One of the best experiences was actually living in San Francisco in a hacker hostel type thing called 20 Mission, very Bitcoin focused co-living space with 40 bedrooms. At any given time, 50 to 100 people in there, some big wild parties, people with different viewpoints. There was like effective altruism people there. There was Bitcoin people there. There were just straight up like Burning Man orgy people there. So there's a lot of different interesting perspectives there. And then, traveled globally and just, something I've been thinking about even recently is like, humanity is good at a few things. Like humanity is really good at, I'll say this in a few different ways. Humanity is really good at practicing gratitude. And the reason I say that is because we've just been like stamped down by governments for so long, yet we're still happy to have what we have. Like most people, despite the fact that many people are living like slaves. And I'm like, including us, we're not far from it. The fact that we're still paying taxes, like we might as well be a slave. But we're still grateful. And then humanity is also globally very good at voluntarily exchanging goods and services, i.e. capitalism. And then globally, when you try to force other people what to do, that's when humanity gets into trouble. It's like, how do we build decentralized systems such that like the core human ethos, which I've seen around the world, is just like people want to have families or, raise children, like pass on wealth to the next generation, like enjoy their lives to some extent, find some meaning in their lives. Every single human being wants that or needs that even. Yet they're getting stamped down over and over again by just like heavy-handed governments and other criminals who are just trying to, infringe on their human rights.
What do you think on this idea that maybe I should move over a little bit too? What do you think of this idea? You mentioned humans are really good at exchanging goods and services and sort of a market-based economy. But also, I think humans are often very altruistic and, potentially just giving gains outside of that. What do you think about other forms of gift economies or do you think that ultimately comes down to this, you were one who considers a different form of...
Well, that's, I think that sort of giving or philanthropy is still a voluntary exchange of goods and services. Like I can volunteer to give you a meal without expecting anything in return. So like in a capitalist society, philanthropy doesn't go anywhere. Like it's all part of the equation.
Do you think that taps into some other kind of, part of the human psyche or something?
I think we're just all on the same team. To some extent, right? I mean, like, as long as we're not... So I've heard human rights described as anything that does not cause harm to another sentient being. And I think there's levels of sentience. But let's just say let's say all humans are sentient as a baseline. Which maybe even that's arguable whether or not that's true. But let's say all human beings are sentient. If I continue to live in a way that's not causing harm to other people, then I'm not violating their human rights. And so I just see like, let's do more of that.
I mentioned to you that on this pod, I love to talk to people that are into stuff like Bitcoin and Nostr, but not only talk about Bitcoin and Nostr because I find, people like yourself are interested in lots of cool things. If you were working on Satoshi Energy right now, what other rabbit holes would you be excited to go down?
I'd be building a tech-enabled private military.
Okay. Say more.
As an insurance company. I don't want to give it all away, but there's a book it's a sort of an essay, I think, by Hans Hermann Hoppe, Austrian economist.
Democracy.
Well, he wrote that, and there's another essay, I think it's called The Privatization of Defense, something along those lines. And he talks about a concept of kind of an insurance company. Like the insurance company's incentive is for the building they're insuring to not burn down, or for the car they're insuring to not blow up, or for the house that they're insuring to not get robbed. And so it's really, they should be providing the security. They're the most incentivized to actually provide the security service. So I think kind of tech's going in that direction, and like we're clearly, there are far more criminals than there are police officers. And it's just a matter of time before like the public defenders are overwhelmed, or if not already corrupt and not really serving the people anyway, to where we're also living in this time. I generally, as I mentioned earlier, I fundamentally believe in humanity, but humanity has also been highly distorted, I think, through this fiat money pyramid, where because people are miseducated, malnourished, manipulated, mentally overworked, they become stressed out, and they've been taken back to their animalistic roots, to where they're just like willing to do anything to get meet their basic needs. So we're living in a time where, like, I mean, literally talking to my friend in San Francisco yesterday, somebody got shot right outside of his door.
In SF?
Last 2 nights ago. He woke up to a cop knocking on his door asking for his camera footage from his front door, which literally has a guy getting shot on it. So like the world could be much safer, but like I think we are likely going through a period of some volatility. And even beyond that, you still need, like, it's still better to be prepared and have some level of defense. Hence a private defense company, insurance company.
Interesting. No, I can see where you're going with that.
Yeah.
On this subject of like going through, potentially some chaotic times. I don't know if we've talked about this, but I kind of assume you're interested in sort of like evolution, how systems evolve. Obviously, the highlight. I've always thought the reason I named my fund that is like humanity right now is going through a phase where you have this idea. I think Ken Wilber has a whole on there that everything in the universe is part of it. It's individually a whole, but it's also part of our systems, so cells, molecules, biological systems, solar systems, et cetera, all the way up and all the way down, probably forever. Would you sort of agree with that characterization that we're kind of fusing right now with other minds, both biological and potentially artificial? And what do you think that transition period is going to look like? Do you think it's going to get really dark before it gets light? Is it going to take a decade? Is it a century-long thing? Is it going to be over in a year because AI goes off so fast? What do you think this evolutionary phase looks like?
It's a big question, so I'm not sure if I fully understand it, but I'll give you an initial pass and you can refine it if you want.
Riff as you.
I think energy is what connects us all already. And so I tend to think that we could effectively reach collective enlightenment instantly because we're all already connected and we're all generally wanting the same things. Or maybe we're already there. Maybe that's just what it is, like it's turtles all the way down, like something eats everything else, So maybe we're already living that. But then from a technological perspective and whether or not we end up joining with that, we've been using technology forever. Not forever, but obviously the use of tools and any sort of manufacturing, even a calculator, is like an augmentation to human intelligence. And we are effectively integrated with it. And I think that will continue to happen. I think there's kind of and again, kind of taking a detour, but there are a lot of people that think like technology has gone too far and we all just need to go like live on homesteads and like not use electricity and basically live like the Amish, which like nothing against the Amish. It's actually kind of a very interesting culture. But my thinking on that is like, if you do that, somebody else who's actually using technology is just going to come take your land, eat your lunch, do whatever they want, and you have no control over it. So you always have to be advancing technologically in order to ultimately stay ahead of the curve and survive as a species. So I'm all for that. And if that means like, interfacing directly with computation or AI, then I'm all for it.
So I think that's a really interesting perspective, and I like that analogy a lot. You have to be kind of realistic and go, as Buckminster Fuller said, right, to work with forces instead of against them.
Yeah.
In your own personal life, this is something I've been thinking a lot about. How do you try and find that balance? Because on the one hand, technology is fucking awesome. I like being able to use maps and call Waymos and like drive Teslas. Like, it's sick. And have solar panels and have I'd be able to tap in the global consciousness via AI and Twitter and now Nostr. But on the other hand, I feel like we're in the very early days of that. And it's also extremely easy to get manipulated by it. And I mean, I think the era of easy mind control has never been better, right? Like, literally, I know so many people, myself included, although I've been getting off there, log on Twitter. Yeah, like that. That's not a healthy way to live, and it's also not a way to quote unquote advance, right? That's a way to stay in fear, which is the mind. So, what do you do in your own life to find that right balance? As an example, I have been making personal efforts recently. I just basically have stopped using Twitter, and I feel a hell of a lot healthier. I've taken days completely free of technology and just silent meditation days, which has been amazing. How do you deal with that in your own life? That balance?
I think it's there's certain principles and virtues that just last through time. One for me is patience. I say that patience is the ultimate virtue. So just not having, you want to dream, you want to think big, you want to be aggressive in your pursuits, but you also want to be patient and not expect things to happen immediately. So I think even just day to day, moment to moment, it's you only have so much attention, so much energy. You really have to figure out how to use that energy and apply it to the things that you think are going to have the most leverage or the most impact and get you where you need to go, and that you have some enjoyment in doing throughout that process. That and a lot of jujitsu keeps me even.
I wanted to ask you, you're I assume you're already quite good at jujitsu. I assume now it's somehow lethal mastermind or whatever here. What kind of role does that play for in your life? Does it feel like that's just connecting back?
Nailed it. Yeah. It's I don't play chess, but it's effectively physical chess, with your body in a high stakes environment where if you're not paying attention, you get your arm broken or you get choked out. So you end up, especially you go against a bigger, stronger, heavier, more highly skilled opponent, and you have to find creative ways under that pressure. You literally have the weight of the world on you, meaning the gravity pulling down on someone else's 250, 300 pound body weight on top of you, trying to choke you. And you have to find a way to stay calm and find more of an analytical solution out of it rather than trying to use brute force to get out of it, which then you can apply that to every part of life. So it's given me this physical embodiment of all of the mental challenges that I go through on a day-to-day basis, which has helped me stay calm in very challenging business environments.
I know we got to go and do a little cold dip and sauna. You mentioned a book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which I actually read in high school, and it definitely worked to my way. I joked at one point with Miles Suter at Cash App, both of us were pre-radicalized while listening to Immortal Technique and hip hop. COVID was the next step, but
nice.
What other, I guess, books or people, source of information, ideas have radically shifted your direction to giving you some really new perspective?
Someone gave me a copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations when I was 16 or 17. And so just reading the Stoic philosophy, what I like most about that book is the way he opens it up and just expresses gratitude towards all the people who educated him before. He didn't have to do everything new. He was appreciating the wisdom that was passed down to him. And then just approaching every day and every moment, knowing that life is short, you need to make the most of it. Change is the only constant. Like some of those concepts, that was hugely impactful for me. I'm sure there's many others along the way. Had some great teachers, great professors, great influences in like the tech world and all that.
Yeah.
People that I've never met that are just inspiring as fuck.
Okay.
I think Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, the people building other like hard tech companies right now, continue to push it forward.
Cool. What else, man? Anything we missed? Anything you want to make sure we cover?
I think you just have more questions than answers now, so not really.
It's the sign of a really good order podcast.
Yep.
Well, awesome, man. Well, thank you for doing this. I really do hope we get you out to SF.
Yeah, thank you. It's great catching up with you. Yeah, I will. Yeah, I mean, I've been here 24 hours and already had some of the most interesting conversations that I've had in years. So,
So fucking back.
San Francisco might be back.
Don't let the haters tell you otherwise. It still may be terrifying.
You might get murdered, but it's all good.
It's worth it. The ideas are that good.
Living on the edge. Thanks, Max.